We often assume that homelessness affects only those who are unemployed, battling addiction, or struggling immigrants. But what if I told you that the American middle class, once the very symbol of stability, is now at risk of financial collapse and homelessness? In today's unpredictable economic landscape, even families who once enjoyed middle-class comfort are facing the harsh realities of eviction, housing instability, and in some cases, living in vehicles or makeshift shelters. The American dream, once thought to be a guaranteed aspiration for many, now feels out of reach for those who once thought they were safe from the worst of economic hardships. Now let's explore the dark side of homelessness in America with Unknown Travel in today's video. We'll dive into how families that once had it all are now facing a crisis they never thought would be their reality. But before we move forward, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Unknown Travel channel. A golden age that no longer exists. For much of the 20th century, the American middle class stood as a beacon of prosperity and success. Families with steady jobs, affordable homes, and access to education formed the backbone of the nation's economy. A life marked by financial security, owning a house, sending children to college, and having a car to drive were not just aspirational. They were expected outcomes for millions of Americans. However, the times have changed dramatically. The golden age of the middle class, where a single-income household could comfortably support a family, is slipping away. A combination of stagnating wages, escalating living costs, and a scarcity of affordable housing has made financial stability elusive for many families who once believed they were immune to economic hardship. Economic pressures. The middle class no longer guarantees financial security. Today, the middle class finds itself trapped in a paradox. Many families, despite holding full-time jobs, live paycheck to paycheck. The cost of living, including essentials like food, utilities, and transportation, has skyrocketed, while wages have remained stagnant, or in some cases, failed to keep up with inflation. The result is a growing financial strain that has many Americans questioning how long they can sustain the lifestyles they've worked so hard to build. The situation is even more dire when you consider the price of housing, healthcare, and education, three pillars that once formed the foundation of the American middle-class dream. As of 2025, housing prices in major metropolitan areas have increased by over 50% in the last decade, far outpacing wage growth. In tandem with this surge, healthcare premiums and out-of-pocket costs have risen by over 60%, adding another financial burden to already stretched budgets. The once reliable path to financial security has become a distant dream for many. Consider the typical American family, a hardworking couple, perhaps a teacher and a restaurant manager, who have spent years building careers and a stable life. Yet despite their efforts, they find themselves struggling to make ends meet. The teacher drives an old car, while the restaurant manager struggles with mounting rent payments. These are the real, everyday stories of families across the United States whose financial realities have been altered by the rising costs of living. Over the past 3 decades, the dollar has lost 82% of its value due to inflation. What used to cost $1 now costs over $5, significantly diminishing the purchasing power of the middle class. This devaluation of the dollar has eroded the savings of many families, making it difficult to afford even the basic necessities. The dream of financial stability is slipping away, and with it, the hopes of upward mobility that many Americans once took for granted. Median household income versus inflation. A stark contrast. While it may appear that the middle class has enjoyed financial growth over the years, a closer look at the numbers reveals a stark reality. In 1980, the median household income in the United States was approximately $20,000. By 2023, that figure had risen to $75,000. On the surface, this suggests progress. But when adjusted for inflation, this gain is far less impressive. For instance, what once cost $1.50 in 1980 now costs upwards of $5. As inflation continues to erode the value of the dollar, middle-class families' ability to maintain the same standard of living becomes increasingly difficult. The dream of homeownership, once considered the ultimate symbol of success for the American middle class, is now out of reach for many. The cost of homes has soared beyond what many families can afford, leading to an 86% increase in the number of middle-class renters over the last 2 decades. Renters who once aspired to own their homes now find themselves trapped in the rental market, often paying more than they can afford just to keep a roof over their heads. Rising rent prices, coupled with stagnant wages, have placed an overwhelming strain on middle-class households. According to the latest data from February 2025, nearly 46% of middle-class renters are now spending more than 30% of their income on housing, with some families paying as much as 50%. This leaves little room for other essentials like healthcare, education, or saving for the future. The dream of homeownership, for many, has become a distant hope. The struggle to afford housing. Even families earning between $56,000 and $100,000 annually are finding it increasingly difficult to afford housing. These households are often referred to as the missing middle, a group that earns too much to qualify for government subsidies, but is priced out of the homeownership market. As this group continues to grow, it highlights a critical gap in the housing market. There are simply not enough affordable options for middle-class families. The financial burden placed on renters has led to an increase in housing instability. Families find themselves forced to relocate frequently, live in overcrowded conditions, or even become homeless. The once predictable pathway to homeownership is now blocked by rising prices and stagnant wages, leaving many families in limbo. The roots of today's housing crisis can be traced back to the Great Recession of 2008. The economic downturn resulted in a sharp decline in new housing construction, and the shortage of affordable homes has only worsened in the years since. Despite growing demand for affordable housing, the construction of new homes, especially those within reach of middle-class buyers, has been limited. As a result, millions of Americans are struggling to find housing that fits their budget. The impact of rising property prices. In addition to the shortage of available homes, rising property prices have made it increasingly difficult for families to enter the housing market. As home prices climb, so too do interest rates, making it harder for prospective buyers to afford a mortgage. Today, it takes an average of an additional year of savings just to afford a 20% down payment on a home, further pushing the goal of homeownership out of reach for many families. Another significant challenge facing middle-class families is the growing burden of debt. From credit card debt to student loans and mortgages, debt has become a pervasive issue for many Americans. This constant financial pressure leaves little room for saving, making it difficult to plan for retirement. pay for education, or weather unexpected financial setbacks. Student loan debt is a particularly significant issue. Nearly 45 million Americans carry an average of $37,000 in student loan debt. This burden delays many families from achieving key milestones, such as buying a home, starting a family, or saving for retirement. The long-term effects of student debt are far-reaching, as it prevents individuals from building the financial foundation needed to secure a stable future. The impact of debt on housing stability debt is directly linked to housing instability. As families struggle with high levels of personal debt, they find it harder to make their rent or mortgage payments. This financial strain can lead to missed payments, eviction, or foreclosure. As more families are pushed into housing instability, homelessness becomes an increasingly likely outcome. The growing debt burden has become a key factor in the growing number of middle-class families facing homelessness. The stories of middle-class families facing homelessness are more common than we might think. Take, for example, a couple who worked stable jobs in education and hospitality. Both lost their jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic, and despite their previous financial stability, struggled to keep up with rent. Eventually, they lost their home and had to live in an RV. These once secure families now find themselves navigating a reality that seemed impossible just a few years ago. Their story is a tragic example of how quickly financial stability can unravel. The psychological toll of housing insecurity. The psychological impact of housing insecurity is profound. Families who face the possibility of eviction or homelessness experience significant stress, anxiety, and a sense of hopelessness. For children, growing up in an unstable housing environment can have long-lasting effects on their mental health and academic performance. The emotional and psychological toll of housing insecurity is one of the most damaging aspects of the crisis. The broader economic impact. How housing instability affects the economy. The rise in homelessness and housing instability has far-reaching consequences beyond the families directly affected. Housing instability puts a strain on public health services, increases crime rates, and increases the burden on social services. As more families face the threat of homelessness, the economic burden grows, putting additional pressure on already overstretched resources. The growing wealth gap. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the housing crisis is how it exacerbates the growing wealth gap in America. While the middle class continues to struggle with rising costs, the wealthiest Americans are accumulating more wealth. This increasing concentration of wealth in the hands of a few is driving inequality to new heights. The housing crisis, in many ways, reflects the broader issue of wealth inequality in the United States. Solutions and call to action government and nonprofit responses. There are a number of government programs and nonprofit organizations working to address housing instability, but these efforts often fall short. Affordable housing programs, rent protections, and financial support for low-income families are crucial, but they are not enough to tackle the root causes of the housing crisis. Until systemic reform occurs, the middle class will remain vulnerable to financial instability. The need for systemic reform. Addressing the housing crisis requires comprehensive reform. Expanding affordable housing initiatives, improving job protection policies, and offering financial education to middle-class families are all essential steps in providing long-term solutions. Only by addressing these systemic issues can we begin to build a more equitable society and ensure that the middle class is no longer at risk of losing its footing. Conclusion. The fragility of the middle class. The American middle class is no longer immune to the threat of homelessness. Rising housing costs, stagnating wages, and increasing debt have placed millions of middle-class families at risk. If we fail to address the underlying causes of this crisis, the American dream will remain out of reach for many. Only by working together to implement systemic changes can we ensure that the middle class has the opportunity to thrive once again. Thank you for watching Unknown Travel. We appreciate your support in exploring global issues and inspiring change. If you found this video insightful, like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on our latest content. Your engagement means the world to us. We look forward to sharing more impactful stories with you. See you in the next video.